Thank you
Yes.
for the opportunity. Perhaps I should start a little bit of background about LWK and Partners. LWK are a Hong Kong rooted architectural practice of around 35 years. In the preceding years, we've expanded across mainland China, Southeast Asia, and now into the Middle East with our MENA HQ in Dubai. And I'm happy to announce and privileged to announce that we'll be shortly opening another office in Riyadh in July this year. Inshallah, with the current restrictions permitting. In the 35 years that the practice has been operating, we've established our own offices in mainland China for the last 20. And as a business with one of the only registered practices in China that can operate as a local design institute, which allows us extraordinary ability to deliver projects full service. Many organizations who operate in China are usually limited to delivering projects only up to schematic design and then having to partner with a local design institute. However, around 10 years ago, there was an easing of licenses, and we were very fortunate to acquire a local design institute, which allows us unprecedented access across mainland China. But like a lot of local businesses, Chinese clients and developers prize the perceived expertise of international service providers, and we unfortunately suffer from that same situation. So it was a decision in 2018 to sort of rebrand and relaunch the business with an outward drive into the international context, hence the establishment of the Dubai office in 2018, and now followed by Riyadh in 2020. However, in the 20 years that we've been operating in China, we've seen some tremendous changes. Obviously, back in the 80s when Hong Kong transitioned from British rule to mainland Chinese rule, there was always an engagement with China, but it was limited. And the agreement that allowed Hong Kong to remain a self-governing entity within the People's Republic of China allowed our practice to begin to see tentative ways of helping China's own development. But that obviously came with a lot of challenges. If we go back to the 1970s, China was still relatively depleted backwater, not the significant rival to the United States that it is now. You know, we see former towns like our sister office of Shenzhen, Poland, from 40,000 people to now 25 million people. And this is a common story across major cities in China. I think it's important to understand that countries like China and also KSA that have huge development initiatives go through their own very unique learning curves. And I think one of the things that we find very interesting at LWK is that we've seen our own neighbor in China go through its own cycle of development, and it's still continuing. But I think, you know, the story of China was a very turbulent one. It was recovering from decades of struggle, political turbulence, and largely a rural economy where almost 3/4 of the population lived below the poverty line. You know, this is the period of change and reconciliation after the death of Chairman Mao. The picture on the bottom left shows Mao Zedong meeting President Carter in 1972. That rapprochement allowed China's own ability to look at itself and understand its needs and understand the needs of its people. And this was largely driven by a development agenda through real estate. the government of China first started significantly focusing on real estate development back in the early 80s, and commenced a sweeping series of policy changes, similar to those recently experienced in Saudi, that simplified the regulatory system and allowed a renaissance in the development of rapid urbanization and population movements. I think one of those interesting things is you see the pictures in front of you. You see Shanghai in 1990, and you see Shanghai only 20 years later. We're now another 10 years down the road, and the picture is again still different. But I think you can see that in that 20-year period, some significant changes have taken place, and that's very much around having an agenda and a vision, very much as we see taking place in Saudi Arabia now. And I think part of today's discussion and presentation is saying, yes, development is good. In some cases, it's necessary. Each case for development is unique to each country, but there's always good opportunity to learn from the good and the bad things from other countries. And I think I'm trying to draw this evening some parallels where we can take time to think about what this 2030 agenda means for Saudi. It's obviously a very positive step, but there are opportunities to make it even more positive if we choose to do so. Today, we see Shenzhen at 25 million. You'll remember from the first slide back in 1980, that's what it looked like in the top right-hand corner. Today, totally unrecognizable and driven by obviously the manufacturing boom that put money in people's pockets, that then drove the real estate boom. And interestingly, while the majority of us were having a very difficult time in 2008, 2008 saw a whole swathe of new regulations being introduced into China, which resulted in a huge boom across the residential real estate sector in particular. During this period of 2008 to 2012, the residential real estate sector grew steadily, but again started to slow down in 2013 and 15. And a number of austerity measures were introduced by the government to streamline regulatory frameworks. And again, that led to a slow in real estate growth. However, a year later, once that sort of readjustment had taken place, we saw a huge boom and a rebound back in 2016 with over a 40% increase in real estate growth compared to the two preceding years. I think, one of the things that we often forget, we all have our own perspectives about China. We all have our own vision of what China represents as a success story or otherwise. It depends on our perspective. But I think the Chinese economy has grown so fast and for so long now that it's easy to forget how unlikely the transformation from those initial pictures that we saw to the country that we see now. And largely, that transformation took place out of a level of desperation because of the institutional changes that needed to take place to manage such a huge population. I think, desperation doesn't underestimate or undercook the actual feeling that took place. It was a very turbulent period prior to that in China. And you could speak to our partners who grew up in Hong Kong during that period and had relatives in China, and it was a very difficult period of time. But in the last 2 decades, the Chinese economy has expanded dramatically, obviously driven by a huge industrial base and a manufacturing base into what's now the second largest economy in the world. And the real estate industry played an unprecedented role in stimulating that economic growth and increasing government revenues in comparison to other industries. Excuse me.
Yeah, sure.
Now, I think we all understand that China leads the world in the percentage of homeowners and internet users, the number of college graduates, and obviously the number of billionaires. And interestingly, from a 75% statistic of people living below the poverty line, that statistic now lies at 1%. And so it just goes to show that if you set the right vision and you put the right drivers in place, and you have a population willing and able to walk along that route, great things can be achieved. And I think on a personal note, I've been working in and out of Saudi Arabia now for 3.5 years, and the changes that I've seen taking place at all levels of society are remarkable and unprecedented. The level of optimism, the level of positivity, the desire to succeed and pull together is something that has real parallels with what has taken place in China over the last 20 years. And I think those changes are evident to see today. But there's no real simple explanation to how China's leaders really managed this transformative development process. I think that to a greater or lesser extent, there was obviously planning, there was foresight. I think there was also a great deal of luck, some skill, and a lot of tough resolve. You know, it takes hard decisions to make countries change. And perhaps most importantly, there was a fear of failure, and that was a big driver in the government's initiatives in China. And I think whilst there may not be the same drivers in KSA, there's certainly a huge amount of resolve and a great deal of planning and hard work going in place, and having visions such as NEOM and the other giga projects, along with the initiatives of the CDC and other initiatives by PIF, show that fundamental planning is taking place, and is taking place at a tremendously fast rate, which really does parallel the changes that took place in China. I think, you know, China's leaders drew lessons from its own past. I think, you know, the recent history of the Cultural Revolution made them realize to a greater or lesser extent that they needed to embrace controlled reform. They know they couldn't continue on the same path that the Cultural Revolution had taken place, and they needed the country to survive and modernize. And by tapping into the wave of globalization, they effectively appeared as the world's factory. Obviously similar initiatives are underway in Saudi Arabia, with strategic measures being taken place in terms of looking at how its own industries are streamlined. And I think it's clear to all observers that there is a desire to reframe the kingdom as a regional powerhouse. It already is a major player in the region, but I think the focus on education and learning, arts and culture, tourism, the nature and the environment, industry and commerce, and real estate development are real key drivers in facilitating this remarkable Vision 2030. I think it's also important to touch upon the demographics of China. I mean, China is the biggest population in the world, and so it has a very strong consumer base, as it were, which also provides a huge impetus in terms of capital. And there's a challenge that we need to look at when we're addressing how we grow the Saudi base and the Saudi economy. And in China's case, that vast population and the demand it had wasn't easily satisfied. This demand was for both residential property. If you can imagine that most of the people lived in the rural environment, more than 80% of China's population lived on a subsistence farming basis, and then the need to create jobs in urbanized areas, and hence residential property very much fueled this increase in real estate growth. This also fed money back into the system and led to grassroots community regeneration in rural areas, as well as in urban areas. And I think this both has parallels with what's happening in Saudi. Not only are the urban areas being focused upon in terms of regeneration and redevelopment, but the provinces in Saudi Arabia are also being looked at in terms of how they can be uplifted and upgraded, and how populations and young people can be retained in their hometowns to allow that that developmental growth to spread across the nation, not just be centered in certain pockets of growth in around Riyadh and Dammam and Jeddah, Mecca and Medina and other cities. In the case of China, though, you know, if you look at the population of China now, 1.4 billion people, only 35% of that population lives in the cities. Whereas if you compare it to Saudi, we have around 50 to 55%. If you compare it to Western Europe and the United States, we have 70 to 80% of the population living in urban centers. So China still has a long way to go to catch up, and they still have a huge agenda of their own. I think it's also important to remember that around 60% of China's economic output is through the private sector in these urban centers. The private sector in China employs around 80% of the population and the workforce, and it generates around 90% of the jobs. So finding the balance between private initiative and governmental initiatives will be very, very important. And China has driven that through creating avenues and vehicles for private enterprise to grow. In the case of China as well, there's little doubt that the level of property acquisition will continue to grow. As I said, China also have their own 2030 vision. They anticipate somewhere in the region of 250 to 500 million people transitioning from the rural environments to the cities in the next 10 years. That level of population growth sort of equates to the population of Indonesia moving from the rural environment to the urban context in the next 10 years. So significant growth taking place. Saudi's own population is growing. It's made up of a very young demographic. And, you know, when I go into meet clients and various entities in Saudi, it's remarkable to see how many young, energetic and talented individuals are holding key roles in the kingdom. And the nation is really embarking on a very exciting new era in its history. There's a real desire to grow and develop. It has a government wishing to support through multiple initiatives of development across multiple sectors of the economy, all at the same time. And this was also the case in China, leading to improved incomes and obviously quality of life and opportunity. And I think that's very important, that all the things that we're discussing here this evening around development, whether they be real estate or other initiatives, ultimately are drivers for the betterment of the population. And that's the key here, is the outcomes that we all contribute towards actually make people's lives better. And I think as architects all tuned in today, it's very much part of our training that we create places for people and urban environments that respond to people's needs. And some of the things that we'll look at later on in the talk sometimes forget that. And some of the stories and some of the lessons that we can learn from China is where some of the decisions that we make need to always remember that there are always outcomes and eventualities that impact on people. You know, as people earn higher incomes and the desire for personal improvement increases, this leads to community and residential growth. And I think we see that expanding through the CDC initiatives in KSA, regeneration, which in the case of China needed to be fulfilled in a relatively short time, has already commenced in Saudi Arabia. And we can see a lot of those regeneration initiatives taking place across the country, which is a very positive outcome. I think it's also quoted that this population change that will take place in China will probably see certain parallels also taking place in Saudi Arabia. This comes on to the projects that help us to initiate these big developmental changes. In China, to accommodate such huge migratory changes, the governments are investing billions of dollars into massive infrastructure projects, just as we're seeing in the case on the screen here with NEOM and other initiatives. Vast amounts of money need to be pumped into the system to allow these long-term initiatives to take place. Some, in China, some are already complete. One of those is the Chinese high-speed rail network. This infrastructure investment fundamentally changed the lives of the Chinese people. If you go back 20 years, at the time of the Chinese New Year, which is the biggest population migration in the world in any short period of time, it was almost impossible for people who lived in far rural areas to get back to be with their families at that important time of the year. But now you can travel across half the country in 4 hours across this vast network of high-speed rail. And these basic infrastructure investments are so critical in allowing the success of deeper developmental changes. And we can see that beginning also in Saudi Arabia. In China, we see highways that span the continents. We have the largest wind farm plant in the world, huge airports, new cities in the desert. China's showing what it really, really means to be developing giga projects. But having said that, that comes with certain challenges and certain drawbacks. The more you make something attractive, the more people want part of it. The project on the top right hand of the screen shows a new giga project in Macau that began in 2018. This is called the Macau New Urban Zone. It's a 4.5 square kilometer land reclamation exercise in Macau, which is one of the former Portuguese colonies of China. Macau is obviously also well known for its casinos and hotel venues. But because it's become so popular, they run out of land and the price of building has become exorbitant. So they're now expanding Macau Islands. And this addition will add around 12.5% to the size of Macau's landmass. This project basically will house, first Zone A, which is phase 1, will house around 57,000 people. And Zone B will be an office district. It will also have retail and another 2,000 homes and a series of entertainment elements to allow for a more mixed-use environment. And then Zone C, D, and E will also have a further 22,000 homes with other mixes of uses, including public space and public realm. So I think you can see that there are real parallels here between what's happening in Hong Kong, in China, and what's really taking place in Saudi Arabia. And the question is it sustainable? Is it absorbable? And is the population, whether it be from within Saudi Arabia or outside of Saudi Arabia, there to make sure that it happens and is successful and has longevity? Other more recent projects in the Hebei province also cover new mega cities around 64 square kilometers. And by the time they'll be finished, they'll be probably the size of Manhattan Island at around 128 square kilometers. These mega cities, they succeed in China because they have over 1 billion people. The question about our mega cities and our mega projects in Saudi is they need a contextual relevance to ensure their success and longevity. I think we're focusing a lot on the giga projects. I think there's more to what's going on in Saudi Arabia other than the giga projects. I think there's a lot of grassroots initiatives taking place. And I think there's a great deal of investment going in and around that we need to focus on and make sure that grassroots initiative in terms of what feeds back into Saudi society is what's really beneficial for the people of Saudi Arabia. And I think now this is a good moment to pause and look at some of the challenges and the context and relevance of some of the projects that we've seen happening in China for the last 20 years. And, you know, China is one of 3 nations that's put its own astronauts into space. That's a fairly remarkable achievement. It's got the world's largest high-speed rail network, as I've said, covering nearly 20,000 kilometers of tracks, and many other development successes. But there are also well-documented examples that remind us that China's rapid development is often accompanied by challenges of contextual relevance. You could also wrap it up in the word of such as failure. However, what other countries have done over tens and hundreds of years, China has been doing in the last 2 decades. And this has posed some really very serious questions. The project on the top right hand of the screen is known as the Three Gorges Dam. This is the world's largest hydroelectric generating plant. And whilst it's had a huge benefit in terms of generating power for the people of China in the province it's situated in, it's also had massive unforeseen environmental outcomes. Whole villages and cities disappeared, and the side effects of the flooding of large tracts of land still continue to have unforeseen environmental impacts. The picture below represents one of 2 projects. One is called Yaojiao Pao in Tianjin, and the other one is Tianducheng. These are, which is near China. These 2 projects are basically replicas of Manhattan and Paris. Well, as an architect, we could all have an opinion on that. I really like Manhattan. I love Paris. But are they suitable for China? Do they have any context in China? Well, the reality is that they've both been completed and they both now are abandoned cities and abandoned developments. So I think one needs to understand that whatever we do and wherever we do it, it needs to have a context that is relevant to the place that we're providing it in. Otherwise, it becomes a blight, it becomes a burden that nobody wants to look after.
The comment is, even if it's copied from Manhattan and Paris, the name is very hard to remember.
Yeah, it's also very difficult to pronounce for a non-Chinese speaker, believe me. That's a lot of practice.
I mean, they was supposed to do something easier since it's copied there. Anyhow.
Yeah, they could have just called it New Paris. But anyway,
somehow.
Exactly.
Anyhow.
I think what's important to remember, though, with these examples, and actually quite a lot more in China, is that we could label them as failures, or we could see these as projects that serve to act as vital case studies that we can all learn from. And I think one of the things that as a business that we've been very fortunate to either have a series of clients or government entities that we've worked with that have carefully looked at their own agendas and have understood the context in which they're developing. And I think one of the reasons why we're so excited about working in Saudi Arabia is that we do see a different approach taking place. Yes, there are some very remarkable initiatives taking place that are quite different from what Saudi's done in the past, but there's also a lot of thought and there's a lot of debate around what those initiatives are. And I think the lesson for us that we've learned in China is to look carefully at how contextually we get involved in projects. And when we make suggestions and we advise our clients and our stakeholders, we carefully look at and remind ourselves of where we're developing, what we're trying to achieve, and what the outcomes are going to be. And these are valuable lessons that we've carried with us over the 20 years that we've engaged in China. That doesn't necessarily mean that we are better than anybody else or that we have a remarkable insight. I think, though, having seen it happen on such a large scale is a constant reminder to our business that we have a responsibility as an organization, albeit a commercial organization, we still have a responsibility to imbibe quality and imbue quality and legitimacy through good thinking into the work we do. I think now it's becoming more prevalent, particularly in China. It's still, in a lot of respects, a very immature market, even though they've achieved a great deal in 20 years. We still meet developers who find the picture on the bottom right as something being very exciting and very engaging. And that comes from a lack of maturity and experience within that development organization. But also, it speaks of not getting the right advice and not being supported in the correct way. And that's something that we're very conscious of, because ultimately it reflects on us and our reputation, which we've worked very hard for the last 35 years. I think now China, in its own approach in terms of its own experience and its own bureaucrats, are understanding that there are best practice approaches that they need to take on board and allow pragmatic project economics to be carefully integrated into the development of large scale and mega scale master plans. One of those examples is one of our own projects. We're very lucky to be engaged in Chengdu. This is the Renmin North Road CBD. It forms one very small pocket within the Chengdu greater area. This master plan has taken a long time to eventuate, but it talks about expandability, it talks about livability, it talks about difference of scales, it talks about how we create places that have safety and employment and recreation and health and wellness at their heart. And that's built in from a very early stage, both in terms of how we integrate our infrastructures and our systems horizontally and vertically through our solutions. These cities, because of the scale of China, but the principles apply, encompass expandability. They look at smart city solutions. They talk about contextual urban planning and placemaking overlays, all sitting comfortably side by side, societal, cultural, governmental requirements, and facilitate commercial success. Ultimately, we need our cities to be commercially viable to allow them to thrive and grow and mature. I think we look at doing these projects in phases. The phases tend to be a little bit quicker in China than other places because they get filled up very quickly. But that expandability is vital. And as you can see in this master plan, ensuring that the natural environment plays a central role in our urban environments is critical. I think if you look at earlier city plans in China, they were very dense concrete jungles. We know that those are not working, and we know that people are moving to other parts of China, other cities in China, where that environment is much more well integrated. I mean, for example, Chongqing, as a city, is 35 million people. It's reaching its maximum capacity, but people are going there not just for jobs, but actually the environment is a good environment to be in. And I think that's something that we hope that we can bring some expertise to Saudi Arabia on. Other elements that we also look at, and this is another one of our projects, is the importance and the vital role that transit and transit infrastructures play, allowing people to move easily in and around and from cities in a fast, efficient, economic, and also environmentally friendly manner is critical, and rail plays a very central part in that. There was a very deliberate choice by the Chinese government to invest in rail as opposed to air travel because of the economic accessibility of rail as opposed to air travel, and the ability to go from centres to centres in a very rapid way. This project is one of the transport hubs in Shenzhen that we've designed recently, called Grand City Canal Comprehensive Transportation Hub. It sits on the periphery of current Shenzhen. Shenzhen is expanding outwards. For those of you who don't know, Shenzhen is the sister city to Hong Kong. Previously, driving from Hong Kong to Shenzhen, even though it was a relatively short distance, would take up to an hour because you're crossing the border. You can now get on the train in just below our office in Kowloon and get out in central Shenzhen 20 minutes later. And this level of connectivity means that people don't have to just be crammed into urban conurbations and create these megalopolises. They can live further out and move more freely. And that also allows us as planners to create better environments for our urban centres, because we know that we have the ability to stage and step out from the city hub.
Mm-hmm.
That's another picture of that project about horizontal and vertical integration. Of course, yes, towers still form a considerable part of the work we do. Just the sheer numbers generally mean that in China, we do have high-rise to super high-rise buildings as a norm to accommodate the numbers of people that we're dealing with. I think that brings us to sort of, you know, we're talking about transition and future, and how does that really affect China, and how does that really parallel with Saudi Arabia? I think, you know, China's not the only country that has successfully absorbed the demands of state rule. We live in a region where, for those of us who live here and feel comfortable with the way that we're ruled, is a system that we're very familiar with. Others from outside of this region feel less comfortable with that, as do people feel less comfortable with a one-party state in China. But for the Chinese, it works. For us, it works here too. But it works in the context that we need a free market to make our development initiatives succeed. But for China, it's done it for a very long time, and it's done it with a really good proven track record of delivery. I think many commentators, when China started its own journey, doubted innovation or change could take place in China. They've been proven wrong. China is now probably less worried about catching up with the rest of the world. It's much more comfortable in its own skin, and it really wonders about how it can pull ahead in its own right, in its own comfortable state. And I think we're seeing that happening in Saudi Arabia. The sense of self, the sense of confidence, the sense of pride, the sense of ownership is evident everywhere that you go. You know, I think, you know, it may be a big statement to make, but Saudi Arabia might in the future be unrecognizable to its founders, but its past, its heritage, its natural beauty, the people themselves hold a powerful allure. You know, tourism is going to be a big industry. It forms a powerful cornerstone in many of the future initiatives, along with the impressive cultural and educational and societal initiatives that are taking place in Saudi Arabia. You know, I think once upon a time, the world thought that it could change China. It probably still thinks it can change China if you listen to Mr. Trump. But Saudi Arabia's ambition and drive for success could be as spectacular as China's own success, and may change the region here in the Middle East as much as the way China has changed the rest of the world. And I think that sort of ends my general synopsis. I think the key elements and the key takeaways here are that there are real parallels of what's taking place has taken place in the two nations, is taking place in Saudi Arabia, but there are very positives in those two stories, and it's how we continue to engage and help shape those initiatives as a profession that's going to be vital. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very actually insightful seeing all these insights actually between how you see the experience in China and as non-Saudi or non-ever resident Saudi Arabia, seeing the developments happening here. We will start taking questions, having a couple of ones. Okay, I think you can see the questions also, right? Or no?
I can't, no.
Okay.
Should I stop sharing the screen?
No, it's fine. Okay, we have a question from Nada. It's similar to the Chinese culture. Saudi Arabia's culture is quite known. How do we as architects ensure the built environment is as 3D manifestation of Saudi's culture and ideals? Do glass skyscrapers and giga projects make sense in concept of Saudi Arabia culture and desert climate?
Look, I think that's a very big and complex question. I think the nature of architecture and those who sponsor it is always a challenge. I think when we're looking at the sort of the initiatives that are centralized and running through organizations like PIF or the semi-governmental entities that are the giga projects, they all have different things to offer, and they all eventuate different outcomes for different reasons. And I think what's important is that to understand that they should all have a contribution in how the broader development of Saudi Arabia takes place. Some of them will be less contextually relevant to Saudis and the people living in Saudi. One would argue that projects like Amala may be focused at a very niche element of Saudi society or a very outwardly facing element, but that's important to encourage engagement with the rest of the world, encourage inward investment, let people learn the beauty and the charm and the splendor that Saudi has to share with the rest of the world, and which is beginning to do very successfully. But that also needs to run in parallel with other initiatives, such as the ones like Qadiyah, that creates a series of infrastructures that are more largely aimed at Saudi society, but also very, very important initiatives like those that are being run through the CDC. There's a huge need for good housing that really serves society, creating communities that are relevant to how people in Saudi Arabia live, how it responds to their culture today, how it responds to their culture from yesterday, and how it will evolve for the future with people at the heart of that. So I think, yes, there are glass skyscrapers, there are pockets of those, but I don't believe they're the dominating factor here. I think there are lessons learned from previous projects that were probably started before the 2030 vision. I think those lessons are being learned. Those are projects that need to be dealt with, they need to be addressed, and they need to be managed. But I think there's also a lot of very grassroots type projects, those being run by the CDC, I think, are a very good example of that, but also the projects in and around Riyadh, the greening of Riyadh, creating cities that are livable and engaging and safe, and that also provide opportunity for regeneration of our existing infrastructures are very, very critical.
Okay, I'm still waiting questions. The topic is really interesting, and we will see if someone have questions or. Okay, we'll take Engineer Atif with us.
Hello. Good evening. Thank you so much, Kareem, for a candid approach to this. I don't want to be hard on the Chinese. I still remember the slide of the fake Paris and the fake Eiffel Tower.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm sure you know, and we all know there are like similar examples that you would find. I speak to you from Saudi Arabia, so there are similar failures here or in Dubai, which is taken as a regional example, that everyone is always benchmarking themselves with it. I don't think there is, I'm not sure if there is actually a way out of fake anything, you know? So you will always find clients, institutional or individual, who would ask for something iconic, but like kitschy of that sort. speaking of the giga projects here in Saudi Arabia, and reflecting on that fakeness, I don't know. I mean, yes, there are lots of parallels with a developing nation like China, but also China produces most of its building material, has most of its workforce. We are still here under a rentier economy model where we have to outsource almost everything. So the concept of value is a bit different. That's one side of the argument. I'm still working with your grand scheme of drawing parallels. The other thing is, and I don't know how it is in China. I've never been to China, in fact. But speaking of giga projects, where like not only lots of people are involved, I mean, as final users or final clients, you know, like just the general public, but also maybe generations like Neom will, I don't know who we are designing for actually. I have a teenager niece who thinks that she should live in Neom in the future because there are robots and free Wi-Fi everywhere. That's her requirement. But the benchmark is unclear to me. That's one thing. I'm an architect, so my experience with giga projects here, the very superficial experience that I had with clients who are doing giga projects in Saudi Arabia is benchmarks are always outlandish. There is no public hearing or any model of participatory design, or there is no public input that will inform the design process, because we are talking about not only a huge number of people who would be involved in using these facilities in the future, but also, you know, like a temporal scale. I mean, there will be generations ahead of us. So we are designing actually for the future. And on both counts, you know, I feel the design process is a bit, I wouldn't want to say failing, but it's just irrelevant to the design question, really. It's only the say of the experts like us, which is not always bad, but it's missing a huge part of the argument. That's one. And also the clients who, and here I come to fake Paris, the clients who would probably be immature, as you just mentioned in your presentation, who might have limited experience, whose definition of the concept of value, whatever it is, financial or social, or is so individualistic and might not really fit into the design issue. So eventually you end up with a lot of these, you know, gimmicks, I would say, as we say in design schools. I don't want to be hard on anyone, but I remember the Palm Island in Dubai. I mean, okay, I don't want to talk about that, but but the fake Paris. It's like, you know,
I'm sure you cannot remember its name actually. The fake Paris. It's really complicated.
I don't know. It's like, I want to like conclude by saying, you know, when you wear and I'm sorry, I don't want to sound a bit superficial, but when somebody wears a fake Rolex, he or she might fake a number of people, but they can't fake they can't fake it to themselves, because they know, you know, that it's not real. Thank you so much.
That's a pleasure, Asif, and thank you for your commentary. I know we're a bit limited on time, but I would like to respond to some of the points that you've raised there. I think you raise a lot of valid points, and I think the fundamental differences between the giga projects in Saudi Arabia and the giga projects in China is all about demographic size. China is about scale, and it's about fulfilling that huge transitionary population migration. And so to a certain extent, the giga projects are very utilitarian, but they need to be utilitarian in a very functional way so that you can actually accommodate and manage millions of people. The giga projects in Saudi, they have a different driver, and the driver, they may not be right yet. It's difficult to tell. One believes that, certainly I believe, I'll speak for myself rather than the whole business, is that some of those projects will be successful, others will be less successful. And I think that will become apparent sooner rather than later. I maintain that the grassroots initiatives are the ones that will be the most successful, the ones that have real societal impact, will be the ones that really move forward and are the ones that really need to move forward. And I think they have that impetus behind them. NEOM, it has a place. What it is, I'm not quite sure yet, but it's a driver for an ambition. And I think you need, I'm no politician, I'm no societal observer any more than any other architect, but you need a vision, and that vision is a vision that needs to be something that's flexible and changeable and adaptable. And I think what we've seen with NEOM is that it's morphing and it's changing. It's not fixed. It's not defined. It had an ambition. It has new ambitions. It will have other ambitions. I think the points you make about authenticity are really very important. And I think the engagement that you talk about that's missing is also fundamentally important, and something that myself and my partner in Dubai, Kura Saleh, we fundamentally believe in. We're both professionals who've been in the industry for over 25 years. We've both worked around the world, from the UK, across Europe, Russia, to Australia and Asia and back. And we've chosen to settle in the Middle East because we believe that there's something important to be done here. But that needs to be done with integrity, and it needs to be done with an understanding that there needs to be commercial outcomes, and there needs to be, at some point, something needs to come back into the system. But that can be done in a different way than it's being done at the moment. And the fact that there's very little debate and engagement across the industry in the Middle East is something that Kourosh and I discuss at length on many occasions, and it's something that we've tried to engage with ourselves. And certainly when we have the opportunity, we really try to imbue that into our work, and we try to really get to the grassroots idea of who are we serving, who are we creating projects for, with all the commercial drivers in place. But at the end of the day, who's using it and why are they using it and what are they going to do with it once we've gone? And I think those broader urban discussions where people are involved need to improve. And I think it makes things more complex, but it makes things a lot richer, and it makes things last a lot longer. So I think, in that context, I very much agree with some of the observations you make.
We have a couple of questions about the connectivity between cities that you mentioned in China, and the huge railways and transportation they have, which is actually enabling them to building mega cities and even connecting them with all the neighborhoods and country reef, etc. The two questions we have actually related to how do you transfer the current car center designs infrastructure to the better connected infrastructure throughout the kingdom, would be like the Hijaz Railway could be one of the examples. And your thoughts about the metro networks in cities that we currently having in progress, compared to also to having what's in China.
Look, I think, don't get me wrong, I mean, even though the high-speed rail links are very good, Chinese cities still suffer from a lot of pollution from cars and vehicles on the roads. The high-speed rail links are often long distance rail connections between major conurbations. But certainly within China, there is a move towards autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, so that at least certain amounts of pollution are taken off. And mobility based upon pedestrian access or soft mobility is becoming increasingly prevalent. In terms of what Saudi Arabia faces and the challenges, I think the commencement of the metro system is critical. You know, one of the things, I mean, I live in Dubai. I relish my life here. I feel very lucky to be here. But there are a number of things that frustrate me, and one of them is the metro system. It's such a linear system that it really, yes, it connects one end of Dubai to the other, but it doesn't penetrate into the communities where people live. So, you know, particularly for those people who are low income earners, you know, you get off a metro, you either have a 20, 30-minute walk from your metro station to your place of work or your home. During the winter months, it's nice, but during the summer months, it's impossible. So then you have to wait for another mode of transport, which usually is a minibus, which then re-adds to the localized congestion and traffic problems and pollution, et cetera, et cetera. So look, whilst metro systems are very important, how they create radial connections are even more important, and how they connect into community hubs is where it's important. If you impose a metro system on a city that has no sense of those pockets of natural development where communities are built up to centers, then the connectivity is lost. And so I think when we're looking at creating infrastructures that around transportation links, it's really important that we create master plans that use those as the drivers of creating communities around them. And when we create those communities and the master plans around those communities, we build in pedestrian mobility, and we create the means that people then can actually use their feet to walk with, to do small local journeys. But we also create the shading opportunities so that they have the opportunity to not have to get into their car. So we create integrated communities around those transportation hubs. So I think just superimposing a metro system onto a city doesn't necessarily resolve the issue. It's ensuring that we embed it in the right places and in the right ways and create developments around that create communities that feel less driven to using automotive forms of transportation.
Yeah.
And then between cities, yes, that's once you have the internal networks, the city or the countrywide networks also obviously play a fundamentally important role.
Which is one of the plans that's happening here. Yes.
It's good.
Architect Keriim, we run out of time, and we are really happy to have you with us today, and we're really sorry for not being able to answer all questions, but I think we covered most of the topics, and thank you again for being with us, and it's a pleasure hopefully seeing you in Riyadh soon once flight's back.
Mohammed, that would be very good. We'd love to meet you. I want to see that amazing collection behind you. It's fascinating me.
Okay. Okay, this is part of my Lego room, actually. Yeah.
And
okay.
I would say to all of those who've participated this evening, thank you for your time. It means a great deal to LWK. We are always open to direct approaches from any of you. Please feel free to drop us an email or pass by our studio when you're in Dubai, and once we open in Riyadh, please come and have a cup of coffee.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.